So in this video we're going to find out about using Blueprint only to expose C++ properties to Blueprint. What we'll be able to do then is find a tank movement component pointer like this and then call a method directly from our axes. And this means that when we play the game, I'll be able to push the left stick forward and back, and I will be able to get through the tank movement component a value as to the vertical position of that stick. So let's go and see how that works. So we have our architecture. What we want to do now is wire it up. Ultimately, we're going to have the tank blueprint in the input section here. In fact, while I'm here, why don't I comment this as the input or movement input binding, like so. On the left-hand side of the tank blueprint, I'm just making it clear what we're doing. What I want to do is I want to add down here a binding from a new input, which is going to be the left stick moving back and forward, for intend move forward. And then that's going to call a method inside the tank movement component called intend move forward. In fact, all of this is going to work very much like the tank aiming component, including the way that the movement component is going to end up here on the tank. So over in our tank movement component, let's create ourselves a new method. I'm going to make this method a void method called intend move forward. Now, that is going to communicate the movement desire. The question is, what does it take in? Well, it should take a float because it's going to be between -1 and +1. And I'm going to call that float the throw, which is the control throw. It's how far forward or back the control is moved. Okay, it's going to be in the public section. Oops. In the public section because it's a very top level requirement of the tank movement component that you can tell it to intend to move forward. Fantastic. Now the next question is, how do I decorate this? Well, I'm actually going to leave that to you because we're going to want it to end up in the blueprint. There's going to be several steps to make this end up properly in the blueprint. And I'm going to give the more advanced of you a fairly good challenge in trying to make that happen. But in the meanwhile, let's just flesh out the implementation of intend move forward. So I'm going to grab the class name over here and just decorate away. Okay, now what I'm going to do is go get the log entry that must be somewhere else in the project. And I'm just going to move it around. Not this one. In fact, we don't need this one anymore. In the tank player controller CPP, in the begin play, we don't need to be doing any of this stuff about whether things are attached or not. The attachment seems to be working, so we can get rid of that UE log. And then I'm going to move the UE log from the tanktrack.cpp's set throttle method. Just going to take that and pop it here in the implementation of this intend move forward. Going to ditch the name and just say something like intend move forward throw %F to format the float and throw. So what I'm hoping is that we will be able to get to the point where this intend move forward method is called, and it's going to be called directly off an input binding, which we'll make straight into intend move forward. The point is right now, if you compile, let's go ahead and compile before I put you in a challenge, you'll find that there are several steps you need to go through to actually make this intend move forward method appear here. It's not just a single step. Now I'm going to give you a recipe in the challenge slide as to how to do it, and I want you to really think and look at the tank CPP and tank.h and think about how this tank aiming component got added and what we did, and then there's one extra step which, as I say, I'll give you the hint inside the challenge slide. But what I'm saying is that right now this intend move forward is not here. We don't even have a movement component. All right, so that's what we're going to want to do. Let's give you the challenge. This is a challenge slightly more for people who are very comfortable with the course so far. If you're struggling a little bit, this challenge may be too much all in one go, but get as much of it done as you can. And then this just gives the more advanced people an opportunity to push themselves and the less advanced people an opportunity to do some of it, but not necessarily all of it. So let's get to the challenge. Okay, what I want you to do is bind some input for forward and backward. That's relatively simple. It's actually just one axis. It's the left thumbstick Y axis. So it's a single binding. Call it move forward if you like. Make the method blueprint callable. So this intend move forward method that we've just declared and defined, I just want you to make it blueprint callable. Then you need to make the tank movement component a default on the tank. It needs to add itself to the tank in the tank's constructor automatically as a sub-object, just like we add the aiming component. Then you need to make a protected variable on the tank to store the pointer to that movement component in the protected section. And finally, and this is the bit where we'll make it visible in the blueprint, is that you need to make that protected pointer in the tank's header file blueprint read only. and nearly all of this you've done before. The blueprint read-only bit you've not used before. I will give you another hint, which is, oh, by the way, you will know that you've succeeded the challenge because when you push the left stick forward and back, or if you've mapped it to the keyboard, same thing, you'll get plus and minus 1 coming out from that log. Now, a couple of resources for you. They're not brilliant. The top one's better. Number 2 is better. Number 1 is just the community site, which is awesome. But number 2 is a blog about creating C++ variables for use in Blueprint. Worth a look. And then there's also a link to Blueprint Callable in the docs. That's in your slides for you. There's your challenge. Oops, no, it's not. There's your challenge. Go ahead, pause the video, and have a go at that now. Okay, welcome back. Let's go through this one step at a time. So I said bind some input for forward and backward. So let's bind some input for forward and backward. That would be in the project settings. It will be under input. And we will have, in fact, I'm going to leave the project settings up on the screen as a tab. And then we're going to have an axis mapping. I'm going to call it move forward. And I'm going to bind it to the gamepad's left thumbstick y-axis with a scale of 1. Great. So in the Tank Blueprint, we should now have, if we search for forward, a move forward event. So that is that event fired with an output value of axis value when I move the stick forward. Very straightforward stuff so far. Okay, now we need to get the movement component adding itself to the tank. So I'm going to save everything as we're going to be messing around with pointers. We've got to, Unreal does have a habit of crashing when we do that. Let's go look at the tank and see how it does it. Well, firstly, the tank has this idea of a tank aiming component. So we're going to need to do the same thing with a utank movement component. Somewhere to store the pointer. Yeah, so utank movement component. I'm going to copy the word movement because that's what's different. Now, is it going to know what a utank movement component is? No. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to forward declare that movement component so that this guy here knows what it is. In a moment, Visual Studio will catch up and it'll go, okay, well, I've got a forward declaration, an empty class. I can at least deal with the name movement component. And then over in the tank implementation file, we're actually going to need to hash include tank movement component. Okay, just like we included the tank aiming component, then right here, just like we added a default subobject for the tank aiming component, we're going to do the same thing for the tank movement component. Again, copying movement, replacing aiming with movement everywhere we see it. Okay, let's test just that for now. Let's go ahead and compile our code. I'll leave the code on the screen for you. So we've just done exactly the same thing as we did before. We've just done a default subobject of the movement component. What I'm hoping when this compiles, if this compiles, is that on the left-hand side here of the tank blueprint, or at least wherever your component list is, components list, you see we have a crash, and that's not uncommon. What I'm hoping is that the tank movement component will move in here. So this is basically because we made a fairly fundamental change to that blueprint, and Unreal just throws a wobbly in those instances. But you're saving regularly and you're not worried about these things, right? It happens occasionally. So here's the tank blueprint. Now look on the left, tank movement component. Fantastic. So how do we get this intend move forward method? Let's look for it again. Still not there. Can I grab a reference to the movement component? No. Can't find corresponding variable. Make sure component has been assigned to one. Now listen. Don't go off to the blueprint and start trying to add variables. There is a variables section under the My Blueprint menu, which you can also get to from the windows here. Please don't go off and try and add variables. It's not how we want to do it. That's not going to work. Even if it does work, it's messy. What we want to do is we want on the tank.h, where we made ourselves a tank movement component, what we never did was say, well, okay, well, this is a U property. And the minimum, property, and the minimum that we want this to be is blueprint read only. So that's the new thing that you've got. You can make a property of a C++ method readable from Blueprint. Just that change, making the tank movement component pointer blueprint read only, should, fingers crossed, let's go ahead, should allow us to drag a reference from the movement component, not the aiming component, because look at the aiming component, it does not have such an annotation, but it should allow us to drag a reference for the movement component right here into the blueprint. Wonderful. And then from that movement component, we can drag off, and now we should have a contextual menu which will allow us to say forward or intend. Okay, so not quite. I can't quite do intend move forward off the tank movement component. Why not? Let's have a look at this. And that's simply because I haven't yet decorated intend move forward with the relevant blueprint callable. So it's a U function. I know that because it's a function. Blueprint callable. And I'm going to say category equals, just to type, keep things together, input. I'm going to recompile, and then I'm going to comment out in a minute this, in the tank.h, this blueprint read-only, because I don't think at this stage you'll be convinced that that's what made the difference, because I hadn't yet put in the annotation here, which makes the whole method blueprint callable. So one step at a time. Let's prove this works now. If I now come off the tank movement component, I do have an intend move forward, all right? So let me just delete the tank movement component just to convince you of something. I want to go to the tank.h. I want to comment out this blueprint read-only. Oops, sorry. In the tank.h, I'm commenting out the blueprint read-only. That's right. Let's compile again. As this is the subject of the lecture, I think it's quite important you get what the effect of this is. Blueprint callable, of course, has made that method callable, but the problem is we can't easily find the method. Let's see. Let's just get the thing. Okay, let's look for the method. We don't have the intend method. Try and drag the movement component in. We can't, all right? So we can't get to this intend method. The key that unlocks all this is making the pointer to the tank movement component blueprint read-only. When that's the case and we recompile, then suddenly, instead of can't move the movement component in, which I'm getting now, as soon as the recompilation happens, I will be able to drag a reference to the movement component. Once I've got that reference, I can come off it, and I can find the intend move forward method only because we have said that it's blueprint callable. All right, so there it is. Now you just wire it in. You wire the execution flow and the value flow, compile your blueprint, going to save everything, play the game, watch the console very carefully. I'm moving the left stick on my trackpad, look, between -1 and +1. Fantastic. Lots to chew on there, but we have now got ourselves a enriched tank blueprint with the tank movement component and the data that we need to be able to drive the tank forward coming through from our control system. So congratulations, big pat on the back, and I will see you soon.